Welcome to episode 9 of our Explainer series. Today, we're diving into one of the most dramatic and, honestly, most tragic falls from grace in Hollywood history. We all know Charlie Chaplin, right? America's beloved tramp. He's that icon with the bowler hat and the bamboo cane who brought joy, laughter, and a really profound sense of humanity to millions around the globe. But behind the scenes, a much darker script was being written. This is the story of how the very country that embraced his genius ultimately turned against him, transforming a cinematic legend into a man without a country. So let's dive into this.
Before we get started, I need to mention, this video is for educational purposes and created under fair use principles. Now, as we shift gears from the silver screen to the cold, highly bureaucratic reality of the Cold War era, we have to understand the climate of America in the late 1940s and early 50s. It was a time of immense paranoia, where political fears and moral judgments really began to blur together.
I want to start by looking at this quote from a London paper reacting to how Chaplin was being treated by the US. "Now the world's bully threatens the world's clown." It just plunges you right into the emotional weight of this narrative. It's a heartbreaking irony, really. The man whose art was universally understood, who championed the underdog and mocked dictators, was eventually hounded out of his adopted home by fear and suspicion. Let's look at exactly how that happened. Consider this staggering number, 1900. That is not a year, folks. That's the number of pages in the secret FBI file compiled on Charlie Chaplin. To put that into perspective, the government was literally watching his every move, compiling massive dossiers on his friendships, his travels, and his completely private life. FBI Director Edgar Hoover personally spearheaded this huge investigation right from Washington, frequently pulling the strings of his Los Angeles FBI chief, Richard Hudd, to surveil the motion picture industry. But here's the fascinating twist. Despite supposedly hunting for communist ties, the FBI actually dedicated far more space in those 1900 pages to Chaplin's sex life than to his political beliefs. They even went so far as to ask British intelligence, MI5, to prove Chaplin was actually a foreign communist born Israel Thornstein. Well, MI5 found absolutely zero evidence of this, nor any proof of Communist Party membership, but the lack of evidence didn't exactly stop the campaign against him. Part 1. The Weaponization of Private Life. The Joan Barry Injustice. With a total lack of political evidence, authorities and conservative critics realized that Chaplin's highly controversial personal life, specifically his history of affairs with much younger women, could be weaponized to destroy his public standing. This all blew up in the sensational 1944 paternity suit brought by a 22-year-old aspiring actress named Joan Barry. Chaplin was 54 at the time, and Barry claimed he was the father of her child. The FBI saw a massive opportunity here. They actively colluded with the press, deliberately leaking information to the powerful gossip columnist Hedda Hopper, who already despised Chaplin. Hopper used her immense platform to relentlessly smear his reputation before the trial even concluded. The trial turned into this crazy battle of science versus public outrage. 3 separate pairs of doctors administered blood tests. Chaplin's blood type was O, Barry's was A, and the child's was B, meaning the doctors conclusively proved Chaplin could not be the father. But in 1940s California, a flawed court verdict actually overrode that science. Blood tests weren't legally dispositive yet, so the science was basically deemed inadmissible to override a jury. The jury found him guilty anyway, and Chaplin was ordered to pay 18 years of child support for a child that wasn't his, simply because of his past reputation and the moral outrage stoked by the press. It was a staggering miscarriage of justice. Part 2. The Artistic Backlash. Boycotting Monsieur Verdoux. The Joan Perry scandal severely crippled his public image, but Chaplin didn't retreat. Instead, he channeled his darkening worldview right into his art. In 1947, he released Monsieur Verdoux. And wow, this was a massive shock to audiences. The lovable tramp was completely gone. Instead, Chaplin played a cynical French bank clerk turned serial killer who murders wealthy widows to support his family. Chaplin used this black comedy to openly criticize capitalism, arguing that while his character is condemned as an amateur killer, the world encourages mass killing through wars and newly invented weapons of mass destruction. As you can imagine, the moral ecology of post-war America was totally at odds with this message, and the public reaction was incredibly hostile. For the very first time in his career, Chaplin was actually booed at a film premiere. Conservative groups like the American Legion demanded boycotts of his work, falsely claiming his films were Soviet propaganda. Because of this, Monsieur Verdoux became Chaplin's first film to ever fail both critically and commercially in the United States. The tide had entirely turned against him.
Part 3. The Final Curtain. Exile on the Queen Elizabeth.
The political pressure, the FBI surveillance, the destroyed reputation, and the artistic rejection all pointed toward one really tragic conclusion: his permanent exile from the country he had called home for 40 years. Let's trace this heartbreaking timeline. Following the 1947 Backlash, Chaplin spent years working on a deeply melancholic film called Limelight. He decided to hold the world premiere in London. On September 18, 1952, Chaplin and his family boarded the RMS Queen Elizabeth in New York to cross the Atlantic. He reportedly had this dark premonition that he wouldn't be returning. And, sadly, he was right. Just one day later, the government struck.
While he was literally out at sea, U.S. Attorney General James P. McGranary officially revoked Chaplin's re-entry permit. The government issued this ultimatum: to return to his home, his studio, and his assets, Chaplin would have to submit to a grueling interrogation regarding his political views and his moral behavior. Now, historians who have reviewed the FBI files confirm the government still had no actual legal evidence to prevent his re-entry. But the pure humiliation of the demand was enough. Chaplin decided right then and there to permanently cut his ties with America.
He sent his wife back to sell their Beverly Hills home and studio, and they settled into a permanent exile in Switzerland. He later wrote a deeply melancholic letter to a friend in the U.S. saying, "It is so wonderful to be away from that creepy cancer of hate, where one speaks in whispers, and to abide in a political temperature where everything is normal and contrasted to that torrid, dried-up, prune-souled desert of a country you live in. You can just feel the profound sense of betrayal in those words."
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to consider. When a nation weaponizes its justice system, its intelligence agencies, and its press against its most beloved artist based on paranoia rather than proof, what does it ultimately lose in the name of security? America lost one of the greatest cinematic geniuses of the 20th century, a man who wouldn't return for 20 years until receiving an honorary Oscar in 1972. It's a really sobering reminder of the fragile line between national security and the suppression of civil liberties. I hope this deep dive helped clarify the complex and tragic final American years of Charlie Chaplin. Please do not forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel Famous Lives Bio. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.